Yes, great. Well, welcome everyone. So we have different levels of experience. We're going to be talking about Zoom 101 for business. I was just asking folks before we started recording how they're feeling about using Zoom. And it's varying levels. So some people are brand new to it and they're being forced to get used to it. Some of them are already using it in their business. So this will be helpful regardless of what level you're at. My name is Holly Jean Jackson. I'm a business coach and consultant. I'm also been doing some partnerships with the chamber, and they specifically suggested that this is something our community needed for our business owners. So I wanted to share my story about one of my first video conferencing calls, just so that you realize you are not alone in this experience. This is probably 9, 10 years ago. So it was when video conferencing was new. And being in the tech world, when I was working in corporate, you were forced to be early adopters. And so I remember having one of my first video conferencing calls, and my camera was in the wrong angle, and it wasn't up high enough. It was kind of angled down, and then my face wasn't in it, and then I couldn't get the audio to work, and it was a nightmare. And back then, videos looked even worse than they do today. I know it can be intimidating to see how you look on video in this particular modality. So we're all in the same boat, but I'm going to show you some settings that will make your appearance improve as well. So that's coming. And then also my first webinar ever. So I had a webinar with probably 30 people. It was my first one. It was on a different platform. So they all have different nuances and things you have to learn. And you want to practice your technology before you host a webinar, so you know how you're going to interface with people on chat, if you're going to ask them to mute the lines, how you do that, if you have the right technology and platform, when it's going to cut you off, how you record it. So there are quite a few things you have to learn. And I was so new to this that I did not practice any of that. And I just went for it. And boy, was it a nightmare. Luckily, I had a really nice audience and crowd, and they were extremely forgiving. So I think what I want to encourage you to do is, this is going to help you be more professional with your first webinar and be more prepared, but also be forgiving with yourself. I think we all understand we're in the same boat, and a lot of people are learning new technology. And I think you'll find that your audiences are going to be much more forgiving than they typically would be. So lesson learned there is, you'll have what you need to do this proficiently, but if you make mistakes, that's completely part of the process and very normal. All right, so I did want to make sure that you guys are all super engaged, and I wanted to ask you, this is our agenda here. How far along are each of you in this journey? So I've heard from most of you, but if you haven't added in the chat, if you're brand new to Zoom, if you're using Zoom for your business, I'd love to hear what you would like to get out of today's session. So you can add that in the chat. It's probably the easiest thing. And if you're having trouble with chat, you can just come off of mute and let me know. And then we'll dive right into our agenda. All right, well, I'll let you guys continue typing away what you're hoping to get out of this. I read some things that I got earlier from the Eventbrite registration, so I have some ideas around what you guys are needing. All right, how do I log into a meeting that is hosted by someone else? Right, okay. It's a great question. So let's save the questions. Never used before, FaceTime and Skype are not professionally. Okay, great. In terms of your questions, if I don't get to them in a specific section, make sure you ask them at the very end. That one I don't want to dive into just yet, because we're going to cover some of that when we get to running meetings and how we do settings. So I think it'll be covered. And Jonathan wants best practices, so I'll definitely be sharing those. Great. Trouble adding contacts to a group. Okay, great. Awesome. So, and if I don't cover anything, we'll have time at the end to get into all of that detail. So for our agenda today, I wanted to start by just sharing the do's and don'ts of video conferencing in general. And for those of you that attended the Power of Video workshop previously, some of it's repetitive. It's about lighting and audio. but it's a great reminder because now we're forced to do this even more for the next 4 weeks or so. Then we're going to talk about how to get started on Zoom. This is going to be a large section because we're going to cover all of the different settings that you may or may not need to use. So, and I will be emailing out a copy of the presentation deck, so don't feel like you need to take copious notes or screenshots or any of that. So I'll be sharing all of that out with you. Then we're going to talk about what you need for your business. What I mean here is, in terms of Zoom, what kind of account or what they call license do you need? And so we're going to talk about what kind of level do you need a free Zoom account, etc. So we'll dig into that pretty deeply. Then we're going to talk about how you host a meeting successfully on Zoom and how to be really professional, as well as how to successfully run webinars on Zoom, because those are very, very popular right now. Great. And then Cindy also added, introducing others to participate, do you need to coach them, etc. Yeah, at the very end, I'm also going to be sharing a list of resources in the presentation deck. In the presentation deck, and it has some of those videos that you might want to send ahead of time to prepare your audience on how to log into a Zoom call. So great question. All right, so here are some of what you should do in terms of all of your video conferencing calls, whether they're on Zoom or Skype or whatever platform. Especially if this is something you're doing in your business, you certainly want to dress professionally. Now, if you're in the athletic business, that might look differently than if you're a business consultant. So just dress according to your professional industry. You also want to make sure you have good lighting. If you attended the Power Video workshop, I showed you the white light. So it's this tiny little thing, or you can get bigger ones too. And I can email you the name of it, but it's a guava white light, and it's a clip-on, and you can put it on in front of your computer. I also have a couple other different lights that I use for my office because this can be bright, but this is generally what you need when it gets darker at night to make sure you're well lit. Another couple of tips on lighting, because this is one of the most horrible things when you have a meeting, is that the lighting is off. If they're completely in a shadow and you can't see them, that's really hard to interface and see what they're sharing and like see all the body language and nuances. Also, if it's too bright and they're washed out, which oftentimes natural light early in the day does that. So for example, I have 2 windows over in my office. In the morning, I close the blinds on one side and just use my white lamp because otherwise I'm washed out. So play around with your lighting, and you certainly do not want the natural light right behind you. If I had a window behind me in the morning, it would be really, really bright and you would just see like a halo effect around me. So make sure you get your lighting right. The next piece is have the right tools. So you want a good webcam. I just had a coaching call earlier today with somebody who was using an older laptop, and the built-in screen and webcam in the computer, and it was really fuzzy and granulated, and so not a great experience for having a face-to-face meeting. You also want to test your audio quality. Now, what affects your audio quality? Well, first of all, we're going to cover this in the settings where you adjust and choose where the audio inputs are, but you might want a mic if your computer is outdated. So you could have a mic that plugs into the computer that you're using for the Zoom call. So you want to test the audio quality. You also want to make sure you have a steady internet connection. So this can affect, if you have a slow internet connection, it affects the visual as well as your audio input. So for example, if you're working from home and your kids are streaming, video, you probably want to tell them not to do that while you're on a Zoom call or a webinar, because it will affect the latency of your connection, and you'll start seeing that weird like white line granulated look on the screen. And then the next one is to know your audience. So when you're preparing, I in particular like to ask additional custom questions depending on the webinar to know where the audience is coming from, or start right off in the beginning asking them so that I can cater and customize the content to where they are to make sure each person's taking something away from the conversation. So that's your list of do's. Let's get to your list of do nots. All right, so our first one, do not have a distracting or cluttered background. So I think mine is pretty clean. I've had maybe one person ever say that it was distracting, but know your audience. And if it is distracting, then change your background. And we're going to talk later on in the settings and getting started with Zoom, how you can have a virtual background with a white screen. So if you have a really cluttered space, don't feel like you need to completely declutter it. There are solutions that work. The next thing is do not move your camera or gesture too much. So can you imagine having a conversation on Zoom with somebody walking around constantly? This actually happened to me last week. And about 10 minutes into the conversation, I had to ask the person if I could just call them back on the phone or if they could stay still. It literally almost gave me a migraine. So you don't want to over move. You can still move your arms a little bit. You want to be yourself, but don't move too much because it can give motion sickness. You also don't want to be late for your calls. There's nothing worse than somebody who's 7 minutes late to a call, or in particular, a webinar. It shows that you're disrespectful and it's not very professional. So you want to make sure you're on time. You also don't want to deliver a monologue. So you notice that I started right off the bat with engaging each of you before the call started and even into the early minutes. I made sure I was asking you to add to the chat. And we're going to have exercises to break up each of these sections so that we're engaged and it's not just me talking at you, but you're actually taking away from it and you're getting all of your questions answered. You also, and this one's hard because right now we're in a different world today. So you want to try to use a space that you have control of. What I mean by this is like you don't want your kids running in the background or your dog or cats walking around because that can be very distracting and look unprofessional. So to the degree that you have control of it, you want to control that. For example, today, one of my neighbors downstairs has a dog, and I've said, hey, could you please try to keep your dog quiet between 6 and 7 p.m. So you try to control the environment as much as you can so it's not distracting. The next do not shout or complain about technical problems. So while you might have a forgiving audience, just say, okay, I need just a second to fix this, but don't complain about it openly, and certainly don't shout, because that can be very disturbing. And then the last one is do not use the wrong technology or come unprepared. And you're gonna walk away from this webinar knowing what technology you need to use and how to prepare. So this one is not something that you will mistakenly do. And since you'll have this deck when you're preparing for your meetings, you'll never do any of these unforgivable mistakes. At least that is my hope. All right, so that leads us to our first exercise. So this is where we're gonna engage on chat, or if you wanna come off of mute, that is fine. So I wanna ask each of you to add to the chat, how well do you know your customer and what are their needs right now? And if you're feeling stuck on the right side of the screen, I have a couple other questions that you could check in on. So I think somebody came off of mute. Gil?
Yep, I'm off of mute. That's a tough question to answer because I'm in the networking business, and obviously the world we're living in right now, it's just not doable other than something like this. And so this is actually the whole reason why I want to be on here.
Great. Yeah. So for you, Gil, you could start running some networking webinars and have like guest speakers come in about how to network online and how to use tools online, and just structure your networking meetings in a different way. So that's a great example.
Right.
Anybody else?
This is Kathy. For the most part, for me, my audience would be comprised of businesses or the Chamber Board of Commerce, or a very specific group of people with a very specific agenda. I could see where I would be in a position at some point in time to not know as much about who my customer is, but in general, where I think I'm going with this is I would know my customer.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why we're seeing the chambers starting to offer webinars around the needs of our business, our members right now, and what's happening with SBA loans and whatnot. Like they just have that at 5. So that's a great example. I think I saw somebody else come off of mute. So anybody else before we?
It was me, and mine is to have meetings within, now that we can no longer have a conference room and have a meeting, a board meeting, trying to use Zoom to have general meetings, because we have a dozen or more board members, and there's no other way actually at this point to have meetings. So that was my question earlier. How can I bring everyone on board so that I can have meetings and I won't be their tutor getting them started?
Yeah, no, that's great, Cindy. So when we get to the section and we talk about how to structure meetings, and when I share the deck on resources, there's a specific list of resources you can send those people in advance that they can watch that are short videos, so that you're not training them. They can figure that out on their own. But there is a little bit of a leadership when you set up a Zoom meeting. So you'll have what you need for that by the end of the call today. On the chat, I saw we have a couple other folks. So one person is doing virtual ergonomic evaluations and training online. That's awesome. We need that at home. I have a standing station. Right now I'm sitting, but I have my keyboard at the right height. So that's definitely needed right now. Oh, and that's great. You're using WebEx. So just know the different nuances, but it's really just getting to know your settings and making sure you send a couple of videos out to people that are brand new to it. And then Jonathan, our participants have a whole new set of needs, and we're looking to assess those needs. Yeah, that's great. But the idea here, the reason I included this exercise is right now, people are thinking that Zoom is the only solution, but it's also making sure you're checking in with your clients and your audience to see what their need is, and you might need to pivot. So this is a modality for reaching out, but check in with them so that you're not offering webinars that are not valuable. You want to make sure you know that you're serving your audience. All right. So getting started on Zoom, the adventure begins. So I like to look at this as an adventure versus something daunting. It's, experimenting and learning something, adding something new to your toolkit. So this is getting started with Zoom. So the step one is to set up your account, whether that's a free Zoom account. And again, we're going to talk about what you need later and how the structure is broken down. But you set up your account, and I recommend starting with the free account to make sure you like the Zoom platform. Then you want to explore Zoom settings, and we're going to go through that in detail in this section. So if you have questions on that, hold those as we go through them. You can ask them. And then you want to test your tools and lighting, like we said earlier, the do's and don'ts. And then you schedule your first one-on-one meeting. So you want to start with a one-on-one meeting, not a webinar. Make sure you're super comfortable and proficient meeting and managing group meetings versus a large webinar. And then once you get really comfortable with that, then you start scheduling those webinars, and you do the first one and learn from it. Give yourself some space before the next one so you can pivot and keep moving forward. So in terms of the Zoom settings, the first thing that you see when you're in a Zoom meeting, and by the way, if you're going to teach a webinar on Zoom in the future, you have to do screenshots of it, because you cannot show the settings while you're in the platform about the platform. So that's why you're getting screenshots versus a demonstration. I learned that the hard way. So right here, this is what you see when you open the Zoom platform once you have your account. So you can either do a new meeting, and a new meeting means you're just starting a meeting from scratch, and you can use that to self-record or invite somebody into a meeting. There's also the join. So if you're joining, like somebody gave you a meeting code, that's where you can push that and enter the code. It's much easier if you just click on the URL from the meeting versus doing it this way though. But if you're having trouble with the URL working, you can click the join button, add the meeting ID, and that will help you join somebody else's meeting. So I think that answers the joining a co-hosted meeting. Either their link, you join from the link, or you join from the join button with their meeting ID. Then you have the schedule button. So when you're scheduling that first meeting, or Cindy, the board meeting that you're scheduling, you schedule, and then that opens up to your email client. So for me, that's Gmail. And from there, it's going to give you some options around the settings that you want for that meeting. Then you want to make sure you're inviting the right people, you have the reminders in there, and depending on your email client, there's different ways you do that, which is why I'm not walking you through that for this. And then there's some other settings here. So if you were to open your Zoom portal, the settings like the client here, and you had a meeting coming up, it would show you in this section here. Right now, I don't have any upcoming meetings because this was taken on the 27th. But if I did, they would show right there. The next piece here is while you're in the Zoom client, you want to go up, and I have a Mac, so this might look different. If you have a PC, it will look different. But you then go into Zoom overall, not within this window, and you want to go to your preferences. Once you click on your preferences, it gives you some very specific options. So if you had general settings selected, these are all of the options you have. Now, you can use dual monitors. So if you had two screens that you wanted to be able to use to present, you want to check the use dual monitors so that you can present side-by-side screens. If you want to enter a full screen when you're starting or joining a meeting, you can have that automatically happen by checking that box. And then entering full screen when a participant shares their screen, you can also have that happen. I like to have a little more control of my screen, so I don't have that checked. Maximize Zoom window when a participant shares their screen. I do a lot of coaching calls. All my whole practice is online. So when my client is sharing their screen, I definitely want it to pop so I can see what they're showing me. I do like checking scale to fit shared content to Zoom window because it just optimizes what you're sharing. It just looks much better. And then I also like to make sure I prompt a confirmation before leaving a meeting, especially when you're hosting a meeting. That's a great reminder. And then the rest of these are not necessarily that important. They're more personal preference. So these are just all of your menu of options for customizing your general settings for Zoom. So if you're kind of wondering how to do this, this is where you can go and change that. And you might have seen some things that you didn't like, so you could uncheck that and see if the experience is better. So that's general settings. But you see there's a lot of tabs over here. So audio settings. Now, if you wanted to, before you do your first meeting, test your speaker, you could do this. So you open Zoom, you go up to preferences, and you go and click audio settings on the left-hand side here. From there, you can test your speaker. You can see what your speaker is. So I'm using my built-in Mac speaker because I haven't really had a lot of quality issues with it. If I were doing a podcast interview, I have a different mic that I use. But when I'm doing these, I find that the mic can be kind of distracting for webinars, and I haven't had any problems with it. But you can test both of them and record them on your own meeting just by yourself and see if you are happy and satisfied with the audio quality. You can also check in the bottom here if you want to join audio by computer when joining a meeting. And I actually checked this after I took the screenshot. I was like, why is it not automatically doing this? And so that saves you a step. So if you're always joining the meeting for audio through your computer, you want to have that checked. But if you're having problems with that and you're calling and you're dialing in, then you don't want to check that. Now, this isn't on here, but if you're dialing in separately and you're going into your computer, you have to make sure you keep the audio on silent on your computer because there will be an echo. If you join on the phone and your computer, and you have audio on both, there will be an echo and it's extremely distracting. So that's another feedback on the audio. All right, so those are your audio settings that you can play around with and test. And that's also where you would add a new microphone input, for example. All right. Video settings. So this is where you guys might like this. So if you're getting a new webcam, and this is the one that I have, and I can send you a link for Amazon because people love this webcam, and it's not very expensive. This is where you add it and make sure that it's your preferred video setting for Zoom because it doesn't know, it'll just take from your computer unless you add it here in the settings. You can also choose if you want widescreen or original ratio and just play with that. I like the widescreen, that's what you're seeing here. Also, you want to enable HD, it's higher quality resolution so you look better. You can mirror your window. If you were a piano teacher, you want to play with when you mirror and when you don't so that they can read the pages of the music. So that's something you want to play with. This is everybody's favorite, touch up my appearance. So I learned this I don't know, a couple years ago, but it makes a big difference. You look really nice. So just make sure if you learn nothing else and you're really, concerned about your look on the video, go and touch up your appearance on video settings. Then the rest of this around meetings, you want to just know how you want this. So you can play around with it. So do you want to display participant names? I do, because I like to be able to engage with my audience and know who is who. And sometimes I'll have somebody join that doesn't have their account set up, and I'm like, who is CPK or who is FTP? And they'll tell me who they are so that I know who's who. You can also turn off your video when joining a meeting. So if you want to join certain calls and then toggle on your video, you have that power. And then you can test your video and turn it off if you prefer. Always show video preview. I like this because I can preview before you guys see me if I look okay and if my screen is right. Sometimes I'll unplug my webcam by mistake and it'll be joining the wrong camera. So it's great to have that preview before joining. You can also hide non-video participants. So this is more if you're recording or you have a big meeting, you might want to have that clicked. You just play with it. Spotlight my video when speaking. This is good because especially if you're recording or doing a webinar on the Zoom Pro platform, you want to make sure that it's spotlighting you when you're actually doing your video recording of it. And then I like to display participants, so that's why I have this checked, especially for webinars. So those are your video settings. All right, recording settings. So in terms of your recording settings, you can store it to a specific location. They do not give you that much storage, Zoom, even with the Pro license. So it ends up consuming it really rapidly. So unless you want to pay a lot of money, like $40 a month, in addition to your license, I recommend recording it locally. And then for my clients, when I record our calls, I put it on Google Drive, send it to them. And then every month I just delete out so that I'm not consuming the storage. But that's a tip for you, is around storage. If you are recording things, you can upload it to YouTube if it's a public thing, or a different Vimeo or something, so that you're not consuming too much storage on your computer or paying for it virtually. You also have a lot of different options here. I've never really used many of these, but if you're doing a lot of video editing and you were sending it out through Fiverr to somebody who's using a third-party video editor, you would want to optimize it for that. You also can record video during screen sharing. You would want that checked if you're doing this for a webinar. Place video next to the shared screen. Again, this is a good setting if you're doing a recorded webinar. So these are just ideal settings for that scenario. And then this just tells you your cloud storage and how you can manage that. So that's the recording. And in terms of recording it, when you join the meeting, you can even set up your webinar ahead of time when you schedule it to automatically record, so that you don't have to remember to hit record. But if you didn't have it that way, you're just going to that more option and hitting record. And it asks you if you want it recorded to the cloud or your computer. So that's how you get there for recording. All right, we're almost done through the settings, and then I'll see if I have missed anything that you guys have burning questions around in terms of settings. So virtual background. So let's pretend that my background was a dump yard or just something really distracting, and it was terrible and I didn't want to clean it up. You can have the option of adding a virtual background, and what that looks like is you would choose one of these. Now, I played with this because I was kind of curious if I needed a physical backdrop or not. Some computers, if they have really high operating system as well as high processing power, which you'd have to test your settings, if you were to click this and not click that you don't have the little actual physical whiteboard, you can get it to work without it. But my computer is pretty current and pretty fast, and I couldn't get it to work, and I didn't want the white back screen. So for most of you, you will need to buy the backdrop, which they sell on Amazon for like $15. But you have to have kind of a white space for that virtual background to project on. And Canva also, for those of you that are using Canva for your design work, also just released new virtual backgrounds that are part of your normal package that you can then import to Zoom. So that's kind of another tidbit for you guys that are pros out there. All right. So that was a lot. And again, I'm sending this deck out to you so that you guys can look through it and play with the settings. But my next activity is, what settings are you going to change, or what new feature are you hoping to add? So if you want to come off of mute or add to the chat.
Do I have different features because I'm not on a computer, I'm on an iPad?
Yes. So if you're going to be running a board meeting or a webinar, I recommend using a PC or a Mac because there's a lot more you can do. It's much more difficult to run these things with a mobile device or an iPad.
Okay. Okay, that's why I didn't have these settings.
Yeah.
No options. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there should be a more button, but sometimes depending on the iPad or the device or the iOS, the operating system you're on, they show or they don't show. Because I've tried it on my iPad, and maybe because it's old, it doesn't work.
Okay.
I think I need a better camera. Okay, yeah. Yeah, and the webcam that I have, I think it was like $30, so I can send you guys that link. It was not very expensive. Any other commitments to settings you guys are going to change, or any questions around settings while we're in this section? I hope you guys are still here with me.
Holly, I missed where you find the settings initially. I'm somehow not able to get off of your screen to look at it on my own computer, so I don't know why not, but.
That's a good point, Cindy. You have to do this when you're not in a meeting.
Right.
So I should have probably started with that. So, okay, when you're not in a meeting and you're opening the Zoom client, so you just click on the Zoom button wherever that is on your computer, your Mac, your PC. Then you're going to go to your menu for Zoom, like the overall platform. So on a Mac, it's your left-hand corner. On a PC, I have no idea where that is. I haven't used one for a minute. But you find that and you go to the preferences option. On a PC, it might say settings, but it should be similar.
And that's different than those 4 things that you showed on that first slide that show up when you first start.
Yeah, so when you first start, that 4 settings thing is the screen that pops up, I think, on a PC and a Mac. But then you have to go somewhere separate that says Zoom either on the top or maybe the bottom left for a PC.
Okay.
And that's where you go to the settings or preferences for Zoom specifically as the client or the tool.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but that's a good point. You have to do this when you're not in a meeting to change your settings.
So when you're in a meeting like this, I can't go off of whatever you've got on the screen unless I leave the meeting.
You can for some settings, but there are some settings that if you changed in a meeting, it would kick you out. So
got it.
It's better. So for example, the fixing your image and smoothing it out, you can do that right now, and that's not going to break anything. But there are some settings that might kick you out. So it's best to play with it later, which is why I'm going to email you guys the copy of the deck.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Great points. Anybody else? Lots of webcams are sold out right now.
Oh.
Yeah. If that's the case, just work with what you have. I mean, content and connection are better than nothing. And then just put a back order for the webcam. Okay, great. All right, we're going to move on if there's nothing else. All right, so what you need for your business. So this is licensing or the membership that you would sign up for. So these are the different levels. What I'm using right now that we're on is Zoom Pro. It's not a webinar account, which is something we'll look at on a separate page. It's just Zoom Pro. So what are some of the differences? So when would you buy one of these different platforms? So Zoom Free is great if you don't need to meet with people for more than 40 minutes at a time. It will kick you out and shut the meeting down after 40 minutes. So that would look really unprofessional if you're running a meeting or a webinar. And it also is up to 100 participants, which generally is not an issue for most of the webinars that I'm hosting. But if you did like a summit or really large webinar, that would be different. And then there are some additional specialized reports and video conferencing features that you get when you sign up for Pro versus Basic. For me, I needed the Pro because when I'm meeting with coaching clients, our conversations can go to an hour or longer. And then I'm also doing webinars that I'm recording. And I didn't want it cutting off. I also like the reporting features, the custom personal meeting ID, so that I'm not having meetings run over to other meetings where the client shows up and I'm finishing up another call that could be really confidential. So there are quite a few things that are great. I would say if you're going to use this for your business, the Pro version is great. Now, there are times where you need more of the business option. So if you're going to have more than one host, or actually, I guess, a minimum of 10 hosts. So Pro is great if you have up to 10 people. If you're going to have more than that, you would need business. So this is for small and medium businesses. I don't know what just happened there. Sorry. That was weird. Technology. So if you're going to want a vanity URL, so what that means is you don't want the zoom.374u or whatever. You want to have, Holly Jean Jackson Zoom meeting. You can set up a vanity URL when you have the $19.99 per month. So if you have a really optimized brand and you want that more polished professional look, that's a reason you would choose business. I'm not going to get too nitty and gritty here because I'm going to be sending this out to you and each of you can dig deeper on the Zoom website into this. But I wanted to just give you a screenshot of this and show you where you can find it so that you're not starting completely from a blank surface on knowing where to start with this. So I think most of you are most likely going to fall into, my apologies, I don't know what happened there. That was weird. Into the either free account or the Pro account, and some of you under the business account.
Holly, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
With the custom meeting IDs, so you meet with your clients probably weekly or every couple of weeks. Do they keep the same meeting ID each time, or do you have to resend one each week for them?
That's a great question. I keep it the same for my clients, and I actually use Acuity. It's a scheduler that plugs into, integrates directly with Zoom. So they have, once they've paid as a client, they have their specific scheduling link and they have their meeting ID. It's already set up and it's already integrated with Zoom. So they literally just go into the scheduler and schedule their appointments. And then it automatically emails me, I accept the meeting, and it goes on my calendar and it has the Zoom URL for both of us.
Got it. And that stays the same each week with them?
Yes.
That's their unique?
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
If you're coaching people back to back or advising people back to back, that's when you want to make sure that the meeting ID changes each time or is customized for each person. Otherwise, you will have people come in and overlap, and then there's a confidentiality breach. Another thing to note is if you are following HIPAA compliance, Zoom is very expensive. You would want to look into Telemed or Telenet because the HIPAA compliance version of Zoom is really, really pricey. It's like over $100 a month. Cool. Now, in terms of video webinars for Zoom, if you wanted to do a more fancy webinar, so you'll notice we can do chat, you can come off of mute. I automatically have the meeting set up where it shows your video and puts you all on mute, but you're able to unmute yourself. And actually, I can mute you if I need to. But if I wanted to poll you and have where you could raise your hand, there's a feature for that if you buy the actual webinar platform. But that costs $40 a month for only up to 100 attendees. And then if you're gonna buy beyond 100 attendees, it's like starting at $65 a month for that. So it's pretty expensive. So you wanna weigh the pros and cons before committing to any of these because it is pretty pricey. But if you were running a really big event, so for example, I'm participating in a virtual summit starting tomorrow. Actually, I guess it started today. And they have a really, really large platform and there's 500 people that are registered. They are certainly using something that's much more fancy so that they can have people raise hands, they can have people polled, and they can have more than 100 participants. So it's really important to know what technology fits the need And so you have to examine, how you're going to do that. So for now, I would say make sure your webinars, you're limiting and capping it to 99 people, because you have to account for yourself, because you would go over 100 if you did not include yourself. So when I set it up on Eventbrite, I say it's capped at 99 people. I ask that people don't share the URL out, and that's why it generally is sent through Eventbrite directly. So that's one way you can get away around that. All right. So that was a lot and super techy. I tried to keep that as simple as I could. But with that, what action are each of you committed to taking this week on Zoom to boost your business? And there's some ideas on the right-hand side. So you can add to chat or comment.
Holly, I think I messed something up. I can't find the slides anymore.
Oh, okay. So if you go up,
See you. Yeah.
there should be a button with your, like, where your video is, that says galley view, thumb view, large active speaker video. So if you play around with those settings, is where the little video screen with all the participants are.
I'm on my iPad. I think it's meeting settings, maybe. I think it's a little different.
I honestly am not an expert at using this on your iPad, and I don't advise running meetings from your iPad, just as a ninja tip for all of you out there.
I was going through my cell phone, the Zoom app that I have. I've actually used it with friends. We've had, group phone calls and things, and I noticed that it doesn't have all the same settings that you went over.
Yes.
Well.
So what I'm sharing is the version on your computer. I cannot say I'm an expert on the phone or the iPad. And I'm really teaching you guys from the perspective of you hosting and leading meetings and webinars, and using this for your business. So it's really slick and professional. You can use it from your cell phone or iPad, but it's easier to do that when you're just joining as a participant versus leading something.
Mm.
So I see somebody saying they're going to purchase something for the virtual support. That's great. Developing a webinar for clients, practice run tomorrow on settings. That's awesome. Very smart. I definitely recommend testing. Trying to improve the way she manages students and meetings, chat, interactive way. Yeah. Keeping interaction high is so important on webinars. And also, you want to limit your webinars and meetings to an hour or less. And if it's a one-to-one, I recommend 30 minutes, because we're all getting a little zoomed out. So we want to make sure we're not overdoing it. Great. Like to read children's story to our patients and families. Oh, that's a really cute idea. I love that. Is that best as Zoom or Facebook? Our audience can do your opinion. Okay, so I would say that's a good question. If you want interaction, I would say Zoom. And if you just you're okay with just comments but not video interaction, meaning seeing the other people on the other side on video, then Facebook Live is great. And actually, a lot of moms and women hang out on Facebook, so that's a great marketing platform for that. And you just want to make sure you let them know in advance that you're doing a live around that. But if you want to see the kids and have them on video, which is also really fun. My sister, the kids on the East Coast are interacting even through preschool. They have kid dates and they're on Zoom calls and they love it. They feel like really special. So it's almost like using their cell phone. They get really excited that they can see themselves. So it might be more fun to try it on Zoom. And there is a way to have Zoom actually broadcast into Facebook, but I believe it's on one of the more advanced accounts and requires the webinar platform. Yeah. Great. Cool. Thanks for all of your interactions. All right, so here's the cliff notes on how to run a Zoom meeting. And we kind of talked about this a little bit, but this is just kind of your guideline if you're doing your first meeting and you're looking for a roadmap for that. So the first thing is you set up your meeting time. If you're using a scheduler, great. If you're emailing back and forth or texting, however you do that, you find the meeting time that works. Then you want to schedule the Zoom call and set up the right settings for that call, like we talked about earlier. So you would go first over to your scheduling the meeting. Then once you open the scheduler in your email client, it gives you some different options around if you want to make sure it's automatically recorded or not, if you want a unique meeting ID, if you want to require a password. These are all things that you can decide based on the meeting. If it's a really highly confidential thing, you probably want to require a password. You want it to be a unique new meeting ID. So those are some things you want to play with depending on the style of the meeting. Then you're going to add the meeting participants so that you invite them through your email client. So you're just adding their names, their email addresses so that they're getting the email notification and how to join the meeting. You can even include agenda items in that meeting, just like scheduling typical meeting on your email account. And then you just want to send Zoom video links for new Zoom users. So Cindy, early on you were asking, I don't want to be the trainer, but I also want to make sure they know how to use the tools so I get buy-in. At the end of the presentation, I have a resources page with videos, and you could decide which ones you want to send your audience. If they're brand new, there's 2 that you probably want to send around how to join a Zoom meeting and how to use it, and just keep it that simple. You could even include it in the invitation to the meeting. So watch these before joining so you understand how to use the platform. When you're getting started, make sure you give yourself meeting buffer time. So you're new to this, give yourself some grace, give yourself some space. So give yourself maybe a 15-minute buffer in case the meeting runs late because it's not going smoothly, or there's technical challenges, or people are running late, or you're having to teach them how to use it. So give yourself plenty of time, more time than usual. And then of course, follow the do's and don'ts guidelines that we talked about earlier. All right. Now, how do you run Zoom webinars? So the first thing you want to do, and we talked in the first activity around knowing your audience. So choose a topic. Your topic should be relevant. So while you might have already been teaching something else, make sure you're checking in with your clients on what their top pain points are right now in your area of expertise. And then offer a webinar around that topic so you're relevant. There's a lot of noise out there, but you also have a very captive audience because people are in some ways less busy and in some ways more tuned into the internet. So it's a great time to run a webinar. Just make sure the topic aligns with your audience so that you don't put all this effort into it and nobody shows up. Then you want to choose the date and time for the webinar. I recommend you make sure you check in with your audience for what the best time of day is for them. Some people it's afternoon in the middle of the day. Sometimes it's evenings, and just experiment with the best time of day. Then you want to build the webinar on Eventbrite or your website or both. You can use different meeting tools if you'd like. I like Eventbrite because it allows you to take payment, donation. It has really advanced email marketing. It has its own marketing in place. We could do a whole webinar around Eventbrite, but make sure you build your actual content somewhere. And you also want to market your event in advance. So right now I recommend 2 to 4 weeks. Ideally, typically 4 weeks or more, but right now 2 to 4 weeks, and just really reach out to your network and say, this is what I'm doing. Reach out to people, invite them on Facebook. Eventbrite plugs into Facebook so you can advertise it on all of your different platforms. Make sure you're engaging registries before attending the webinar. So I sent you guys a note out letting you know this is happening. I was engaging potential people on different Facebook platforms and groups around joining. Jeremy sent a video out and I was like, hey, Jeremy, help me market this to YPA. I made sure the chamber knew it was coming up. So I was reaching out to people to make sure people were registered and to specific registries too. Again, have the right technology and prepare. And everything we talked about has been about preparation and how to do this right. So if you follow these steps and test everything and do that preparation, you'll have a great first webinar. It'll be much better than my first one. All right, so some successful webinar tips. Again, you want to use a laptop, preferably with a monitor. So right now, I have my webcam, which is sitting above my actual monitor to the right here. And then I have my laptop below that so that I can see the meeting notes, the chat, all the attendees, the participants in here. So I know I have 13 people on right now. I can see the next slides that are coming up, but it's not showing to you. So I'm only sharing my monitor screen, and then I have my notes, my next slides that are coming up, and my chat down here. It looks much better when you're recording a webinar and more professional if you have everything else down on your laptop, but that requires the 2 screens. So in a perfect world, you want to try to use that. Again, keep the length to an hour or less because it's a long time to be online versus face-to-face. Our previous workshops were an hour and a half, but they were face-to-face, so it's a little different. You want to have exercises so that people aren't just totally zoning out. There's so many webinars I've joined where I put it on and then I'm sending emails and I'm doing this over here totally spaced out, not paying attention. So the more engaging you are, the more people will actually retain the content you're sharing and get something out of it. And then it makes it more valuable to other participants because they're asking questions that are relevant to the whole audience. And then you want to share stories and facts, right? So I shared stories in the beginning about my first webinar. I shared about my first video conferencing call and how scary that was so I could relate to all of you and help you realize that you need to give yourself some grace, that you're going to have moments of failure, but you still want to put yourself out there and make it happen because we don't really have a choice right now. And then I've been sharing examples and facts around, it's best practice for doing webinars in an hour or less. And just giving some credibility to the conversation throughout by sharing examples from previous things I've run, or like the Rise Above Entrepreneur Summit that's coming up, sharing how they're running things. So those are some tips for running a successful webinar. All right, I know that was a lot. So our next activity and our last activity before we dive into a closing and questions and answers is what Zoom action are you committed to taking this week? Are you going to get new tools, schedule a webinar, add something to Eventbrite? So you can come off of mute or add to the chat.
So I'm going to contact people one-on-one and practice a little bit more Zoom, particularly people that are new to Zoom so they feel more comfortable. And if I mess up, they maybe won't notice.
Yeah, it's a great thing to practice one-on-one Zooming versus one-to-many. Jonathan, it looks like you came off of mute. Did you want to share something?
Yeah, I think practice the user side, and then as we were talking, I downloaded the iPad version as well, so I can familiarize myself with that and what people are experiencing on that side as well. Because wow, it's pretty different.
Yeah, as I'm hearing all these questions on iPad, I'm like, oh, I got to figure that out. But yeah, it's also like depending on what operating system the iPad is on, so it's tricky.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I see Marianne sending a questionnaire out to get a feel for what people are interested in learning about and exploring using Eventbrite. Elaine, I'm going to shorten my Zentangle classes and stretch them out over more days. That's great. Acquire intro videos to share with new clients so they know how to engage. Very smart. So you want an easy, smooth onboarding process. And then look into Acuity for scheduling. Yeah. Actually, the 3 Business Time Savers event, Marianne, that's coming up, one of the tools that I'm talking about is Acuity. So that might be helpful on April 8th. Cool. Great actions. Scheduling some one-to-ones or 2. Great. Awesome, Gil. Good. I'm excited for all of you. All right. So I did want to share that one of the most common questions that I get from folks when I do these webinars is, how am I going to move my business online, especially right now? And this is why I do offer one-on-one customized coaching that are catered to your specific needs so that you have that guidance, that support system, and you can figure out your roadmap to keep you on track. So whether you're in the very early stages of building your business, whether you're pivoting because of what's happening right now and trying to figure out how to offer services online, even if most of your stuff is physical, or whether you're really succeeding and just wanting to have a larger impact, regardless of where you are, coaching is designed with you in mind. So given with what everything's happening today, I am offering a free 30-minute coaching call. So any of you that are interested in that, you are welcome to sign up, and I'll be sending a link in the chat in a moment on how to sign up for that. And the email I'm sending out with the slides will have that link as well in case you miss it and you're still getting new to using the Zoom chat. But you will walk away from that session with new ideas, heightened focus, and a clear perspective, and you'll know what step you need to take next for your business today. So I'd like for you to picture a day where you know exactly what step you need to take next in your business. And picture a day where you have a client walk up to you and says, oh my gosh, like you really saved me in this crazy time and provided the right service for me at the right time. And picture a day where you are filled with constant energy. You have a reliant business that is providing you really great recurring revenue, ongoing, even through crazy times like a pandemic. So together we can actually build that day. It's right around the corner. And to sign up for that, I'm actually going to send this link into the chat right now. You can click there and find the best date and time that works for you. So investing in yourself is actually the first step that helps you take action that matches the size of your dreams. And I hope that you are ready to take that action if you are needing help right now. I know this is a very interesting time that we are facing. And I just want to say this is a crazy period. I've been talking to a lot of new clients, potential clients, and getting really creative on how all kinds of different business models can provide services online. What I will tell you also is that a lot of people think this is a temporary thing, but when you build a new stream of revenue online, it's ongoing. So it's going to serve you past this pandemic. So it's just diversifying your business model and making you have more residual income so that if this happens again in the future or something else where you need to use technology or you need more flexibility, what's great about it is it's giving you that ongoing income. So I'm here just to empower you today, and I'm hoping that each of you gets a lot out of using Zoom and a lot out of this new technology. And I just noticed I sent that privately to Elaine and not all of you. So I just sent in the chat the link for signing up for that. Now with that, I would also like to open it up to any questions that you guys have on Zoom. Any final questions, ideas for your business, problems?
Well, Holly, this is, oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask you about how you, well, just this. If you have a group, how you keep everyone from speaking at the same time, how you determine if you're having a meeting. You don't have 12 people speaking at the same time, just like that.
Well, if I wasn't presenting,
We didn't set that up.
You guys are colluding. So if I wasn't sharing a presentation screen and you had 12 people meeting, you could actually see all of their videos, right? So if you're hoping to not over talk each other and you don't need to share your screen, you'll be able to see their body language so you can actually like know when to talk. Right now it's harder here, but if you were doing a big webinar, that is where if you want it to be polished without interruption, the webinar platform is better because they can raise their hand and then you unmute the person that raised their hand. So it's not a perfect world. Some of these I've done chat only responses, but we don't have too many people. So if it was more than 20, then I have chat only. If it's less than 20, I recommend unmuting, and it's, you just try, and then people do interrupt each other. It happens. On that, Jeremy, what were you going to say?
I just wanted to interrupt. I didn't have anything to say. No, I saw that Jonathan is on the call, and I was wondering if his virtual classes at the Parks and Rec are going to be through Zoom.
Yeah, the rec department secured several Zoom accounts as of now. The preschool is still operating with Zoom teacher check-ins, and the senior service department is getting ready to offer some of their free programs, some of their book clubs and lectures, their positive living group They're preparing all of them for Zoom. And then we're getting ready to work with individual instructors to start offering various classes through Zoom. So we're very excited about this, and it's a new world, and I really, really appreciate you doing this for the community. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share some of those with the community. But I was going to say, as far as Zoom goes, I am an instructor. So I will be trying to learn this to teach a class of 60 students one day a week anyway. But also, yeah, I'm looking forward to diving into this more for my office in Lafayette, seeing how I can provide more value to people using this. This was really helpful, Holly. This was really helpful. Some people were saying, well, I already know a lot. What else can we learn from this? Well, you just dove into a bunch of things that I still had no idea about. That's really cool. So thank you.
Yeah, I was trying to look at what other people were offering for their free things and add enough value without overwhelming you and getting too technical. So hopefully we met the happy medium.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Any other questions, comments?